You're listening to Transcendental Talks Toronto, transcending your mind, elevating your consciousness. Welcome to another episode of Transcendental Talks Toronto, the podcast where we connect with each other through discussions about elevating our consciousness from a spiritual perspective. Through conversations with a variety of guests, we will delve into how to balance material and spiritual pursuits, experiences along the spiritual journey, self-improvement, the practice of bhakti yoga or devotion to the divine, challenges, tips, and inspiration, all in a way that is both fun and deeply relevant.
Today's episode will highlight another inspiring way in which bhakti can transform one's life. Bhakti means connecting to the divine through means of loving devotional service. This episode will showcase various ways in which we can integrate bhakti into our life and lead a fulfilling life in all circumstances. I'm Punya Shravana.
And I'm Radha Priya, and we are your hosts at Transcendental Talks Toronto.
Today, we have a very special guest, Kalakantha Das, who has been practicing bhakti yoga since 1972. He is an accomplished practitioner and teacher, sharing bhakti with thousands of people through lectures, seminars, and books, including A God Who Dances, The Saint Within, and several others. He specializes in translating Sanskrit texts and Bengali poetry for English-speaking audiences and establishing ashrams for young bhakti yoga practitioners. We are so excited to have you, Kalakantha Prabhu, on Transcendental Talks Toronto. Welcome to the show.
It is very nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So to get started, having been part of the Bhakti tradition for 52 years, we would love to know how it all happened, what inspired you to join and, become active in this practice.
Where did the time go? That's how I feel. You say that. I have had such a nice time with Bhakti. And by the way, I want to mention I'm visiting here in Toronto from the basement suite in the Toronto Temple. And love to come here and meet with you all and share this story with you. I grew up in a middle-class family in America, in New Mexico, southwestern United States. And both of my parents were from poor families, and they achieved some success through their education. My father actually fought in World War II, and after that got on the GI Bill and was able to go to college, the first person in his family to go to college. And my mother had a similar situation in life. So when they married, they were very hopeful of giving their children more advantages than they had had growing up. So my sister and I were born to them and had this middle-class life and comfortable, not wanting for anything, good health, everything was very favorable. I found myself, though, in my teen years feeling like something was missing. So although I had every opportunity and every advantage, really, I began looking into spirituality because the church in which I was raised was really not answering my questions. These questions were things like, why, if God is all good and God is all powerful, why do some people have all advantages in life and other people are born with all disadvantages? Bad health, poverty, broken families, all of these anomalies just didn't make sense to me. So when I asked my Sunday school teacher this question, she said, it's the mystery of God. It's a mystery of God. So we can't know these things. We just have to believe. That didn't work for me. And so I kind of gave up on the church and started exploring Eastern theologies, Eastern traditions. There's a book known to many. It's called Be Here Now by Baba Ram Das. And he was a Harvard professor who went from LSD to mysticism and presented in his book a real buffet, a smorgasbord of spirituality, a little from this, a little from that. So through these books and other experiences, I began to really question the value of the middle-class life that my parents were offering me. So that came to a head at one point after I graduated from high school. I had been practicing a kind of meditation where I was very quiet. I was trying to realize the presence of the divine in all places and all times. And it led to some kind of withdrawn behavior that my parents found very strange. So they called a psychiatrist to come and speak with me. And when I realized what was happening, I was so insulted with their lack of respect for my spiritual quest that I just went to my room, put some clothes in a backpack, took all the money I had, which was $40, and just walked out the door. I'm going to go find God. And they thought, okay, we were right to call the psychiatrist, but unfortunately couldn't stop him. So I walked and hitchhiked and took a bus and went to visit a friend in San Francisco. Saw he was living a very hedonistic life and with drugs, and I just didn't want any part of that either.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in to visit some relatives up in Portland, Oregon. And there I got a job and started supporting myself and reading and seeking. I visited Buddhist centers and African American or AME centers, which were full of spirit, but I still couldn't connect. And then one day when I was delivering office supplies in downtown Portland, I saw a kirtan party out in front of a department store. And it was just stopped me in my tracks because they seemed to be not only practicing something spiritual, but they seemed to be really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
So I stopped and watched for a while. And then one of the devotees, Dinabandhu Das from Vrindavan now, came over and offered a book to me, a Sri Ishopanishad. I gave him $1 and I took it home and began to read. Now, I'd read many spiritual books, but this one I really could not understand.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that prompted me, okay, I'm going to take up his invitation and go visit the temple. The temple was just a fledgling project there in Portland, a suburban house with 8 or 10 devotees living in it, a very quiet suburban neighborhood. And from the moment I walked in, I was just struck by the high degree of devotion and clarity and joy in the devotees and the residents there. So after attending the lecture and participating in the kirtan, they served a wonderful feast. And I had been practicing vegetarianism for a year or two, but I never tasted anything like that. To me, vegetarianism was kind of like grazing, just try to put the most nutritious foods in you can. There was a wonderful vegetable dish and rice and puffed bread, and dessert was a yogurt soaked dumpling called malpura with strawberries. And by the time I finished that, I went to Dinabandhu and said, so can I move in? And they had a very strict vetting program in those days. He looked at me and said, okay. So I jumped in, not knowing a lot about Bhagavad Gita and about the Vedic tradition, but being very impressed by the character of the devotees.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a couple of months to really begin to understand the philosophy. But when I did, I could also connect it with the Christianity of my roots, that Jesus had called his followers to take to the spiritual path with some degree of detachment to their conventional lives. And this also made sense to me in relation to the practices of the traditional ashram. The ashram is a place for spiritual immersion, and I really loved that experience of being a resident in the ashram. I stayed there for 2 years and then went into some professions in commercial book sales to academic institutions. I would approach the professors and sell sets of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Purana, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavad Gita. And these books were very well received in academic circles around the country and in Europe as well, and India. So these years of my young life, I went from a conventional upbringing to being a monk, essentially, for 10 years. And those 10 years were just wonderful. They went like that. And I was having so much fun. I didn't realize that life could be that fun. In fact, I felt more joy in those years than I had felt since I was a young child. Just more unbridled uninhibited happiness, hope. You know how children are, everything looks great. Mom and dad are the greatest mom and dad in the world. And then, by the time you're 18, you wish they just lived in another state. This is the kind of joy that I was feeling, and it just impressed me so deeply that since then, I have just dedicated myself to practicing and teaching this great tradition. My wife also shares my joy in bhakti, and we've been married 42 years now. We have 3 children, and I've made a living through business, real estate business, and that has allowed me to devote most of my time to this purpose, teaching and writing and sharing bhakti with others.
That's such an amazing story that you shared. How old were you when you moved into the ashram?
I was 18.
18. Mm-hmm. So that's amazing, because there's, especially from our younger audience who are, looking at ways to bring spirituality into their life, they often think about these ways in which they can dive deeper. What is it that you would say really stood out about the ashram experience?
It was the immersion, excuse me, the full-time opportunity to practice, and the focus. In other words, the purpose of living in the ashram was just for the spiritual education, and that was what I had been seeking. Now, since then, I've come to see how that spiritual education augments conventional education, conventional careers. It is not exclusive. In other words, most people who practice spirituality are not full-time practitioners such as I am, but they have ordinary responsibilities and spiritualize them through this educational experience of living in an ashram.
Yeah, that's so inspiring. And so I see that goes into maybe, is that something your experience as going through the ashram, did that inspire you to start Krishna House?
It did, yes. When my wife and I were about in our mid-50s, a friend approached us and asked if we could manage a small center in Gainesville, Florida, a small ashram and temple near the University of Florida. So that temple was like many of the ashrams that were born in the 70s. It had become kind of a quiet place, stable, but not very active. And we decided when we took over the management that we would try to make it more accessible to the 60,000 students at the university next door, as well as others in the community. So we made adjustments to the practices to make them a little more user-friendly. We set minimal standards for people to reside in the ashram to make it more convenient. And we challenged people to add this dimension to their education, the spiritual dimension. What I discovered that universities, at least in America, were generally founded on spiritual principles. They were founded by churches, or at least religion was considered a core part of the educational experience. So at the University of Florida, for example, and many campuses, most public campuses in the US, there are big church buildings in the middle of campus that are no longer used for church purposes. They're no longer used for religious purposes because the government resolved decades ago that church and state should be separate. The university should not promote any particular faith. At best, these former church buildings are used as interfaith chapels, but generally they're just used as auditoriums now. And spirituality is off campus. That's something separate. So one of the professors at the University of Florida wrote a compelling book about this, lamenting the loss of spiritual training as part of the educational experience for young people. The spiritual training is meant to teach us how to navigate life in a constructive way, in a meaningful way, in a positive way, not just measured by how economically successful we are or how famous we become. So the spiritual dimension is really missing from secular education. And recognizing that, we decided to focus on that at the Gainesville ashram. And that has been really successful, actually. We've had hundreds of students who've stayed in the ashram over these last 15 years, 16 years. And they, like I, experience how spiritual immersion is just fun. It's amazingly fun. It relieves all kinds of anxieties that are kind of baked into our ordinary life. It also stimulates us to take a perspective on life that is different from the mundane and ordinary, which gives so much purpose and meaning and value to our life. So that has been going on since then. And when I retired 4 years ago, I got invitations from here in Toronto and other places to introduce that ashram practice and help it become more widely available to people in North America.
Mhm.
Can
Yeah,
you
that's so inspiring.
Can you share a little bit more about what a day in the life of a resident in the ashram would look like? You know, you mentioned the spiritual immersion, and for our viewers, I think we'd love to hear, you know, just how much we can benefit from being in that type of environment.
Yes, sure. There are of course, monasteries, convents, ashrams of all types and many faiths. The principle is to allow the student to become a little detached from the ordinary course of things while focusing on learning sacred texts. So a day at the Krishna House ashram, for example, begins at 6 a.m. There is a congregational chanting or kirtan session, followed by an hour of private meditation using japa beads. Our Gaudiya tradition centers on this mantra meditation, which is a way to, in my experience, it's a much more effective way to meditate. In my teen years, I tried to make my mind quiet, and it was very difficult, not very successful, and very boring also. So from the Bhakti ashram, I learned how to do mantra meditation, which involves chanting. And chanting is not a sectarian practice. We chant the Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That mantra has the effect of allowing the mind to focus on something tangible. The sound, the feel of the beads, the vocalization of the mantra. We set aside an hour for this from 6:30 to 7:30 every morning. And it's perhaps the most challenging practice for the newcomers, but generally by the time people go into the immersion program, they have some individual practice on their own. They have already learned how to chant, practiced at home for some time, so they can make that adjustment to do a full hour. After that, there's another brief kirtan group chanting session, followed by a study of the Bhagavat Purana. And we have a variety of teachers from very senior experienced practitioners of bhakti who give those classes. That's a typical day, Monday through Friday, typical morning, I should say. After that, people have various duties. Some go to college, some have jobs, some work in the ashram full time. And then in the evening, again, people gather for another kirtan and study of Bhagavad Gita, then take rest as early as possible. The earlier, the better. The earlier we can go to bed, the more ashramite life will be appealing, because the early morning hours are incomparable for meditation, for prayer, for introspection. There's less energy in the air, there's less distractions, the morning air is sweet. And for that reason, it's the ideal time for spiritual practice. So this goes on Monday through Friday. Saturday and Sunday are free days. We often organize excursions into national parks or beaches or someplace in nature to supplement the study that we've had during the week. The diet is all vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian or vegan, as people may choose. Meals are communal, which saves a ton of time in cooking. And the friendships that people make are really remarkable. We have 25 students typically, and from very diverse backgrounds. It's people who have grown up in America, in India, and other countries, people who are from Indian backgrounds, non-Hindu backgrounds, Spanish, African American. It's a very diverse group. And this is the other dimension. The friendships that you make in that bhakti environment are incredibly deep because of the shared spiritual experience. I know in my spiritual quests in my teen years, it was very lonely, and most people didn't relate to my interests at all. So being with a group of young people, people my age who shared these spiritual interests, was an absolutely incredible experience. And I still have relationships with some of those people from more than 50 years ago. So that's a typical day. Have I answered your question there? Is that given an overview?
Yes, yes. It helped me kind of live what that day looked like. And
Mhm.
I know for myself, who went through university here and never really had the benefit of kind of that spiritual environment, I can look back and say so many young people are being benefited when they can bring this into their life. One of the things I also wanted to ask a bit more about is how long is a typical stay in the ashram?
Mm-hmm. Well, the ashrams run on a trimester basis, about 3.5 months each, spring, summer, and fall. And the length of time will depend on the individual circumstance. We encourage people to take 1 semester as a minimum, and after often trying it out for a week or two. And after the end of the semester, people may renew or move on. Sometimes people stay while they're completing their undergraduate and even graduate degrees. Sometimes people stay for some time while they're teaching or while they're getting established economically. They can stay in the ashram very inexpensively and have their meals and their friends in a very convenient way. So that allows them to get a good start in their professional careers. So it really varies. I would say anywhere from 3 months to 3 years is typical.
That's amazing. I think it's very important in the work that this ashram does in terms of the younger generation, because while we're young, it's hard to balance that spiritual and material life, especially when you are going through university and college or, post grad. You are in that stage where you're like, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do. And you're still deciding, what the meaning of life is, and also trying to um, you're also being pulled by other friends in different areas where they're like, I think in that stage of life, like there's a lot of partying, drinking, and so having that outlet through the ashram is so important. And I think even for you, how did you balance your material and spiritual life through even your career and your schooling?
Mhm. I rather than go through a conventional college education, I studied things selectively that were of interest to me through adult education and professional education. Um, and again, spirituality doesn't negate these things. We don't say that they're bad. There's just the purpose of doing them changes
Mm-hmm.
from just ordinary rewards to a spiritual purpose. And that's what we learn in the ashram, how to change material things to spiritual. So in my case, I chose a profession that did not require as much conventional education to enter, just a business basically, and buying and selling real estate. I was very fortunate, did well in that. I also studied dispute resolution and wrote a manual and then studied and taught in that field. I volunteered in the court system in Florida for some years as a dispute resolution professional or specialist. It was all volunteer. And then I also served in community development and administration. I became a council member for our municipality in Florida. And that was a very interesting and educational experience as well. So in addition to my spiritual study and teaching, I've had a full life in a variety of other pursuits. This is why the ashram training is so useful, because you can do all these things and at the same time keep your ordinary responsibilities met. But Radhapriya, I wanted to also respond. You were saying, as I was having my 18-year-old existential dilemma, I have come to understand that's fairly common. And as you say, people usually respond to it by, let's not worry about those questions now. Let's just look the other way and have fun and not consider what's the meaning of life. We'll deal with that later, whatever. Now I'm young. I want to enjoy myself. I just want to drink and have a party and have boyfriends and girlfriends and social experiences. So the problem with that is we're just postponing questions that do need to be resolved. We do need to understand the meaning of life. If we don't know it and we just go ahead with the flow and get into the economic development that society offers us, there's always going to be a sense of incompleteness. That is because we are by nature spiritual beings. We need to have these questions resolved. We need to understand our place in the universe. We need to understand why we're here and what brings real fulfillment for human beings. So just ignoring the question, covering it over, it's an unfulfilling approach, just avoiding the unpleasantness or the uncertainty. So it takes a little courage to enter the spiritual path. We have to be willing to question the conventional wisdom, the ways of things, but not a huge amount of courage, not as much as it does to ride some of those rides we saw yesterday at Canada's Wonderland, or to do skateboarding or bungee jumping or whatever. There's a little bit of a step out of the normal flow of things. And when we do that, sometimes it's hard for people to relate to us. What's the matter with you? You don't like partying? You don't like us anymore? What's the matter with you? Why can't you be satisfied with all these opportunities that you have? And we need association with other spiritually minded people for that reason, just to help reinforce our understanding. We're not crazy for asking these questions. We're not crazy for questioning whether this conventional way of life is for me. We're actually exercising a higher intelligence than most people live. Henry David Thoreau, the American spiritualist and author, wrote that most people live a life of quiet desperation. That is, they've never answered these questions. They don't know who to talk to about them. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they're feeling, wow, maybe have I wasted my life? And that is frightening. That is unnerving. Better to deal with the issue, especially in youth, because learning spirituality is not this huge learning curve, really. It's just an education that is missing in the secular society that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite insightful. I was kind of curious to just know more about kind of what is it that inspires or kind of motivates individuals to join the ashram. Oftentimes, we have people who may be inquisitive about spirituality. They may want to learn more. Others may have gone through certain ordeals or events in their life that make them want to see if there's something deeper and how do I relieve the distress I'm going through. Mm-hmm. In establishing your ashrams, do you find that you get a mix of audiences, or is it one or the other more?
Mm-hmm. Oh no, there's a great variety of reasons, Punyashravan Prabhu, why people will want to have a spiritual immersion. Distress can certainly be one of them. Trauma. Sometimes people have addiction issues. And sometimes people are just curious. And sometimes people have been reading and come to the conclusion that a life without connection with the Supreme is meaningless. So that drives them through their knowledge. So there's a variety of reasons. It really doesn't matter what the motivation is. What does count, though, is the degree of sincerity that one has in getting these things resolved in their lives.
Yeah, that's a really nice statement. It's really about the individual and what they're really looking for. Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that we kind of discussed during our introduction is that you're a writer. You wrote, many books, including what we mentioned, The God Who Dances and The Saint Within. Can you share a little bit more about your inspiration to start writing and how that also, just continues on as part of your spiritual life as well?
Well, my spiritual teacher, Srila Prabhupada, was a prolific writer who published about 80 books and hundreds of pages each, with translations from the ancient Sanskrit texts and others. So about 25 years ago, I was thinking, yes, I really would like to develop this hobby of writing, which I toyed in. And so I undertook a serious attempt to make one of his books, the Bhagavad Gita as it is, more accessible to an English audience. He wrote in English, of course, and he was a very great scholar, and his presentation was very thorough, academic, and it's very powerful. But sometimes people would have a little trouble wrapping their heads around it, even though it's the first book of the Vedic tradition that is recommended. So I decided to do something he had done in Bengali many years earlier, 30 or 40 years before. That is to put the Bhagavad Gita into simple rhyming couplets. He wrote a book called the Gitar Gan, which was the 700 verses of the Gita in vernacular, easily understood Bengali couplets. So I undertook doing the same thing in English with his translation of the Bhagavad Gita, putting it in couplets so that it would be very accessible for anybody. And that was my first book, called The Song Divine. I really enjoyed doing it. It was great fun. And in spiritual life, that is the indication that we're on the right track, if we really enjoy what we're doing. So for me, that opened up a whole new avenue of writing, which I have been pursuing ever since. The attempt to understand in English what is readily presented in Sanskrit or other Indian languages is challenging. Srila Prabhupada, my teacher, had English as a second language. Mm-hmm. So his attempts were kind of, they're very academic and formal language, full of valuable information. So sometimes making that presentable to a wider audience is helpful, and he encouraged that. He wanted us his students to assimilate his books and then present them in our own words. So that started my literary career, which remains my favorite hobby. Book. Yes, this is the first English translation of Srila Prabhupada's Gitar Gan. Yes, dating back over 60 years. So it's very, very popular in Bengal and Bangladesh. But now it's available in English for the readers, and we're putting that in an audiobook as well for those who are too lazy to read. No, I'm just
But it's more convenient, like these podcasts, just listening while you're driving.
Yes, exactly.
And so what other books have you authored? So I know you just, I think, released one, or it's called Sarangati.
Yeah, Sharanagati. This is the great predecessor teacher, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He was a very prominent teacher of spirituality in the 1800s, early 1900s in Eastern India. Mm-hmm. He had a very relatable background in one respect. He raised himself from poverty to a high position. He had a large family. He had many responsibilities. But his focus on spirituality underpinned his entire life, even as a highly placed government official. So he wrote about 100 books. Some of them were in English. He sent one to Toronto or to Montreal rather in 1896. Yeah, to McGill. The first book really introducing this particular brand of spirituality, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, in English. And most of his books are in Bengali. So again, not knowing Bengali, I really wanted to make them more accessible. Mm-hmm. Aside from the academic translation, what does it really feel like? And poetry is great for that reason. You have to be very selective about every word, every syllable. And I put his songs into English, and they can be sung in Bengali or sung in English or both.
I love that. I think because, for us, I don't speak Bengali. I don't understand Bengali. English is my first language. And so it's hard to connect with words that you don't know. And so being able to see the words in English and see the meaning behind it, I think you can make more of a bigger connection with the poetry or the Bengali verses.
I'm glad you feel that way. That's the goal. It's sort of in beta testing now. See how it goes over. In our Krishna temples, there's a certain liturgy. That is, certain songs are sung in the original language and everybody learns them. And then there are translations, and translations are more flexible. Changing a liturgy, that's kind of dicey. But to change a translation is something that is common in spiritual traditions, and because language always needs to be updated, right? There's another example of that. I went back to the Bhagavad Gita and put it in rap after.
That's so cool.
After seeing Hamilton, I said, okay, if they can do history in rap, we can do Gita in rap.
Oh my gosh, can you read something from there?
All right, if you like. I'm not a very dope rapper, but I'll do my best here. This, by the way, this title is, you know that phrase, the wrath of God? The wrath of God is like a Judeo-Christian idea that God is this fearsome person. And although Krishna, the teacher in Bhagavad Gita, is a heavy person, he's not a vindictive person, nor is he angry at anybody. He's just giving the factual information about the value of spiritual life, the importance of spiritual life. So he's not threatening, he is loving. He is not angry, he is helpful. So in this section of the Gita in chapter 2, he describes the qualities of a spiritual person or a transcendentalist. A seasoned transcendentalist perceives the soul within and easily skims off the senses' self-indulgent whims. An experience of spirit, when correctly understood, emancipates the candidate from chains of bad or good. Such dual influences cannot fool the cool of mind. They're never ruled by anger, fear, or lust of any kind. Their senses standing back from mundane visions, sounds, and smells, they're like a turtle tugging tender limbs inside its shell. One may suppress the senses, but desire still remains until a greater flavor makes it painless to refrain. The restless senses otherwise persuasively take hold of even the most sober souls who strive to keep control. Controlling all your senses, contemplating the supreme, you'll straighten out your cranium and wake up from your dream.
Wow.
That was amazing.
That was.
Well, I'm just a plagiarist. These are Krishna's instructions here.
So do you find when people are reading the book, like, do they kind of, they read the Gita and then they're kind of like reading the book and then they find the parallels? How do you complement the two together?
Right. The Bhagavad Gita as it is our cornerstone. It's our anchor. You know, it is the foundation on which we build our lives in bhakti. So nothing can replace the Gita as it is. So for people who are new to the Gita and maybe struggle with it, something like this could be helpful. Or for those who know the Gita well or are familiar enough with it that they can apply it readily, would find something like this helpful as a sort of refresher or to see it from a different perspective. Those are the two groups that I'm trying to appeal to with that book.
And so what is the process when you're, writing this poetry or writing these rap verses? What is like a typical process for you to write these?
I just take the original verse and I have a quota of 2 verses a day. So it takes about an hour for me to figure out how to present the content of 2 verses in English on average. Sometimes more, sometimes less. So so say the Gita is 750 verses, 700 verses rather. It took me about 1 hour a day for a year to versify and then go back and edit.
Amazing. And I kind of just switching gears, but I just wanted to ask you about, through your practice of bhakti over the years, we for sure run through challenges and obstacles. And so what are some of the ways that we can, or you have actually experienced overcoming these obstacles, and what can we do?
Right. This is the great educational benefit of spiritual training, that we learn to at least recognize the ephemeral nature of these obstacles, these setbacks, these traumas that inevitably come in our lives. one of my teenage inspirations was a poem by Kipling called If. Have you heard that poem?
Yes.
One of the lines is, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat these two imposters just the same. So when I read that as a teenager, I couldn't understand what he was talking about. But after studying Gita and trying to apply it in my life, the meaning is very clear to me. And Krishna makes this point repeatedly also in the Gita. When we encounter obstacles, we can deal with them best by keeping perspective. We are spiritual beings living in the material world, and the material world is characterized by struggles and obstacles and suffering and pain. It's not our home. It's not where we belong. If it were too nice, we wouldn't want to end our sojourn in this world of birth and death. But as the Gita teaches, this body, this life that we have now is not our first life. We've had many before, and we're going on to continue in some future life in a different way. The spirit inside does not die with the body. Spirit does not change with the body. The spirit just animates the body. And because it's anti-material, it can't be squelched. It can't be killed. So seeing that makes us, it empowers us to be at least a little callous. We don't let the obstacles define our lives any longer once our spiritual life is awakened. We don't let the setbacks put us to a point of despair where we can't function. We are able to I would say, not overcome them, Radhapriya, as much as tolerate them, endure them, and recognize that they're not going to last. So this idea of tolerance is alluded to in many sources, many traditions. I really love the Bhakti tradition because it not only teaches endurance or tolerance, but it provides a better or an inevitably joyful process for us to turn to. That is through chanting and through associating with other spiritually minded people and through any number of practices that are part of Bhakti Yoga. So even in a time of distress, we can take refuge in the joy of Bhakti. So that helps us endure the down periods, but it also helps us level out the up periods. Like when you have your health and you have your economics together and you have your career and your family and everything's all lined up, you just realize, wow, this is a really good situation for me to make the most of it for increasing my spiritual practices and deepening my realizations and my understanding of spirituality. So we don't get too caught up in the good times or the bad times. That's the idea, and through the joy of Bhakti.
Thank you.
I did want to say the hits keep on coming. I'm turning on 70 in a week, and it just is amazing to me how there's never been a time in my life where there wasn't some kind of distraction, pain, struggle, on something unwanted ever. It just doesn't go away because that's what this world is built on. So I'm so grateful to Srila Prabhupada, my teacher, for giving me this pathway to consistent happiness through all of the struggles of this world.
That's amazing. So one of the things I was also curious to know about is, for yourself, you mentioned you retired a few years back, and you're dedicating yourself full time to this path of bhakti. Do you do certain activities where you travel to other parts of the world, set up ashrams? Like, what is your general outlook in terms of your spiritual practices and vision going forward?
Right, it's a big challenge to introduce this ashram program in contemporary society. What I found, Punya Shravan Prabhu, is that there are always seekers in every society, in every age. There's always people who are dissatisfied with the status quo and want to understand higher knowledge. People who question whether the ordinary course of things is going to bring them happiness. So I travel and work on these ashram projects. There's ups and downs, but everywhere the same thing is there. People are interested when we create the facility, then people who want knowledge seem to show up out of nowhere.
Mhm.
So here in Toronto, for example, you set up this Krishna House or Bhakti Academy ashram about 2 years ago now. And their beautiful arrangements were made for residential purposes in the temple. Teachers were established, courses, curriculum established. And I think practically since it's open, it has been full. You've had a full house. You have 15 beds and 15 students, men and women, in their separate ashrams. So yeah, it's done very well in Toronto. I think people in Canada have a particular powerful inclination for seeking spirituality. At least that's my impression. Kind of more thoughtful than the raucous, passionate Americans where I come from. But even America, even China, Russia, all over the world, the beautiful knowledge Srila Prabhupada gave us in the Gita, this bhakti tradition, it goes above the bodily concept of life. It's not just for one nationality, race, or gender, or ethnic group. It's for everybody. And so that's my experience in setting up ashrams. Everywhere we have tried, there's always been sincere people who have stepped forward and been very grateful for the opportunity. So we have ashrams in 6 or 7 locations now going on. We hope to have them throughout the continent within the next 20 or 25 years. But, it's a big challenge, not nearly as big as the challenge Srila Prabhupada faced, though, coming here to America at age 70 with no money and no support, just the knowledge and a few books. Amazing what he has done to establish bhakti communities all over the world.
Yeah, so I think that's something that inspires you the most. Like, what inspires you the most about Srila Prabhupada and that you've integrated into your bhakti life? Like, what makes you keep on going?
Srila Prabhupada was just awesome. He endured so much. And I always remember one quote. He said, "I am not one to be discouraged easily." He had tried for 20 years or more after he retired from his business life, family life, to start or to develop interest in bhakti in India, and found almost no interest and very little support. But when he came to the West, which is a huge risk for a 70-year-old, he had 2 heart attacks on the way and almost died. But we finally arrived in New York, was able to set up a little place to practice and teach. And the reception from the young people in the West was huge, was really good. So that inspires me that even in impossible circumstances, he was trying. And even when he suffered many setbacks in the course of his efforts, he was never daunted in his pursuit of his objective. So yeah, I would say that's the most inspiring thing. And I see now, it wasn't because he had great character, which he did, but it was because he was getting spiritual happiness from pursuing this mission and this purpose in his life. That inspires me tremendously, just seeing how he was always ecstatic and blissful, even when things were not going well for him. Externally, I should say.
It's wonderful to hear of, just individuals like yourself sharing such nice memories of Srila Prabhupada. Everyone, has different memories that really stand out. And for younger people like ourselves, it makes us also just feel more connected as well when we hear that.
Just as a Christian boy, I felt when I was with Srila Prabhupada, I feel like I'm living the Bible here, like I'm watching Jesus in action. It was like that. I couldn't really appreciate fully that opportunities. I just tried to get the most out of it. Now, many years later, in retrospect, I can appreciate so much more. And that's a beautiful thing about Srila Prabhupada, that he's very accessible. Even now, he may be the most widely written about religious figure in modern history. There's a 6-volume biography, and there's his own publications, which were, as I mentioned, 80 volumes or so. And there's numerous dozens of memoirs of people who are close to him, that are really entertaining and enjoyable to read, and count and describe this saint, this modern saint who was in our midst for 10 years, from 1966 to 77, so 11 years. Yeah.
And just on a note, especially for our younger audience who's tuning in to our podcast, a lot of people are looking to start up spirituality and wondering, how do they move along this path? Is there any type of advice you'd like to share to our audience?
Yes, don't spend any money. There's plenty of people who will take your money, but very few who will take your karma. So if somebody's wanting to charge you for something more than, I don't know, maybe the cost of a book or something, then be cautious. The mantras are readily available. In fact, any name of the divine, when chanted, will have the effect of uplifting your consciousness. That's free. It's available for everybody, and it's non-sectarian also. The general advice, though, is don't be afraid. Even if the majority of people are going in the direction of materialism, don't be afraid to pursue your spiritual interests. It doesn't mean you have to give up the material things, the ordinary things, the studies, the career, whatever. You don't have to stop those things. It's just putting them in their proper perspective. Spiritual life is the purpose of human life. It's what we're made for. It's what we're built for. We're not built to just live like animals who have no intelligence, but just meet their physical demands and are satisfied. Human beings have physical demands like the animals, but we also have superior intelligence. I'm a grandfather, and I have watched my children and grandchildren after birth. And so I also have a couple of cows, and when I watched our mother cow giving birth, that calf was up on her feet in 5 minutes, nursing. But a human baby, it takes like 6 weeks before you can even get the head off the mat. So we can see that human beings have this disproportionately huge brain, right? And our brains take a huge amount of energy from our lives. So why do we have this brain? Because we're meant to use it. And just to use it for increasing our animal propensities or streamlining them is a terrible waste. It makes no sense, right? When we have the ability to understand our purpose in the universe, the means of enjoying ourselves that are far superior than the physical. We have that capacity, but unfortunately, we're not encouraged to use it. So that would be my message. Hey, don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated. Don't be, pushed away from your spiritual interests by society or friends or whomever. It just takes the individual courage to say, I really want the answers to these questions, and I'm willing to make that a priority in my life. My father used to say, when you're packing for a vacation, put the biggest suitcase in the trunk first. You can always fit the smaller stuff around it. But if you put the small stuff in first, then there won't be room for the big one. So that's equivalent with spirituality. It's got to be our biggest focus in life. We put that in first, we can fit everything else around, no problem. But if we put all the little things in, we deal with those as our priorities, then trying to cram the spiritual life in, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I really like that. Making sure you focus on spiritual, and then everything else kind of complements it.
Yes, yeah.
So,
That's the message of the Gita, isn't it? It's all about the warrior Arjuna, and he doesn't want to fight. And then Krishna teaches him how to do things spiritually, and by the end, he's ready to fulfill his duty. And that's the beauty of bhakti, that it just complements whatever it is we're doing. Practically anything except being a butcher. If you want a career as a butcher, bhakti is not for you. Because part of spirituality is nonviolence, nonviolent diet, etc. So other than that, just about anything.
Well, thank you so much, Kalakantha Prabhu, for joining us on Transcendental Talks. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
Just that Yeah, you're very fortunate to be here in Canada. Canada is such a beautiful country, and it has such amazing people and such a relatively sane society. Maybe that sounds funny to you, but remember, I'm coming from America. So the opportunity also provided in Toronto for the ashram is really first class. So anybody who has the time in their life to take a semester off, a gap year after school, or even to work or go to school while getting a spiritual education, I really encourage you. This place is fantastic for that purpose.
Amazing. Thank you. We've been so honored to hear about your journey and your spiritual perspectives and how we can transform our lives. And I'm sure our listeners agree. So thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. That concludes our episode of Transcendental Talks today. Please stay tuned for more enlivening conversations on spirituality moving forward. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day.